Hello and welcome to AppStories. I'm John Voorhees, and with me is Federico Viticci. Hey, Federico.
Oh, hello, John. It is fantastic to talk to you today. How are you?
It is fantastic to talk to you too. I'm doing very well. You know that we just got off a very short pre-show, a very spicy short pre-show, because we are making some changes with
Because
AppStories
the pre-show
Plus.
is ending.
It is. It's just going away. But that's because we're going to be doing a post show going forward. So we're actually just changing things up a little bit. AppStories Plus, that's the version of the show that's extended, ad-free, and gets delivered early every week. And you can get it two ways. One is you can subscribe directly to AppStories Plus, because if you're a big fan of AppStories Plus, maybe that's all you want to do. You can do that by going to appstories.plus.
Easy.
Gets all those things, right?
Very
or
easy.
you could become a Club MacStories Premier member. Premier means you get all of our newsletters, you get all of our special columns, you get lots of perks. You get the Discord, but you also, along with that, get AppStories Plus. It's everything that we offer in terms of bonuses. And you can go to plus.club to learn more about that.
Yeah. Premier means we love you. That's the easiest way to describe it. We have, I think, today, so we're going to be talking about the post-show later.
Yes.
We have, I think, a very reflective episode today.
I think so, yeah.
We wanted to have this conversation about this sort of meta conversation about ourselves. Not in the sense that we're going to be talking about me and you, but I feel like we wanted to address some of the things we've been thinking about how to cover artificial intelligence tools at MacStories and sort of where it's a long conversation that I think it's one of those things where some people are going to be happy, some people are going to be unhappy, and we are just going to stand in the middle of that, being extremely open about what we think and how we feel.
And I think the time is good now because you and I have both written a little bit about AI in recent weeks and tools that we're using, things that we're doing. And I think a lot of people might remember back last June, just after WWDC, we wrote a very strongly worded letter to Congress and to some of the EU Parliament that we thought AI companies ought to be regulated. And I personally think that that's absolutely still as true and valid today as it was last summer. But people probably remember that and think, oh, I remember MacStories people, Federico and John were really upset about AI. What are they doing? They're flip-flopping now. They're using AI. What's wrong? What has changed? And I think the best place for us to start before we go too far into this, Federico, is to remind people probably what that letter was really all about, because you and I did a lot of soul searching back then, and we have since. I mean, AI is something that you and I have spent an awful lot of time thinking about over the last 8-9 months since last June. And the thing that triggered that response in that letter up front was the fact that Apple revealed at WWDC that they had scraped the entire internet to generate their model for Apple Intelligence. And I think it's not too strong to say that we felt betrayed in that instance. No. Not because Apple has always put itself out there as a company that has championed creators and the arts and that sort of thing. I mean, that was something that we knew that other companies were doing, but it was not clear at the time that Apple had done that. And they gave us a way to opt out, but they did it after the fact, after they had scraped the whole internet. And simultaneously with all that going on, there was, it became clear that Perplexity was scraping the web without telling anybody and violating robots.txt files. There was a lot of shenanigans going on with AI companies. And our point in that letter was very carefully tailored to two things. One is, we think that's wrong, and I still think it's stealing to scrape the internet, because I think that what these AI companies are doing is very different than someone browsing the internet. They are essentially consuming all of the content created of the internet for their own financial benefit in a way that the internet was never designed or created to do. And then secondarily, we also were upset with a lot of the generative AI uses that we were seeing. Because remember, last summer, the world has changed a lot in the last 8 months in terms of the AI tools that are available. What we saw at WWDC was Image Playground, What we saw was emails being written for people. What we saw were ads from Apple about how you can be a lazy employee and get your work done, by having the AI write your stuff for you. None of which we think is a good thing. So that's kind of the place that letter came from. And I, for one, at least feel like that letter is as valid today as it was then. But there's also a lot of other things going on that we should talk about too. I mean, I'll stop for a second, Federico, and let you chime in about where this all started
Yeah.
before we talk about the path we've been on for the last 8 months.
Yeah, no, I completely agree with all of that, and um, I feel like obviously MacStories is a drop in the bucket of the internet, right? You see these tools that have scraped blogs like MacStories or 9 to 5 Mac or 6 Colors. They've scraped everything, and still those blogs are a few more drops in the large, wide bucket of training sets for
Right.
large language models. But and these large language models, they have scraped scientific papers, academic papers, books, paintings, photos, videos, all kinds of things. Now, if you ask me today, it's been 8 9 months. Do you now feel that it's okay for AI companies to scrape the web without your consent, without telling you? I still think it's wrong. It still very much sits wrong with me. I think it's uncomfortable. I think it's wrong. I think it's a degree of intellectual theft, if you ask me. Like the idea that I put words on the internet for people to read. I don't necessarily put them on the internet for bots to scrape it and contribute, although in a small part, to a company's profit and to a company's market valuation. So I still continue to believe that appropriating other websites' content without telling them, making it opt out is wrong, is morally wrong, and I feel like I I feel bad about the thought of I put this 15 years of content on the internet and it became the 0.05% of something that can be used for all kinds of ways that are beyond the scope of what I intended my articles to be consumed as, which is articles read by people. So I feel like I still have that thought. I mean, and you see a lot of people complain about this stuff. We have put our names and our company's name on those letters that we have sent to politicians, and I believe only one of them replied, and it basically went nowhere. And it doesn't matter. Like it, what matters is that that's something we believe, and even though there's and this is where we're getting to the meat of the conversation. There's nothing we can do about it because you and I, MacStories Inc., like we're just powerless in front of it. But it matters to voice your opinion, even though you're going nowhere with that opinion. Because let's face it, we have gone nowhere with that opinion. In fact, maybe we have alienated a part of the audience that was thinking, who do you think you are? Acting all high and mighty about it.
Oh yeah, we certainly did have people who walked away from the
Hmm,
website, I think, because of it, and that's okay. I mean, I think that people who really know you and me know that we have strong opinions, and we're going to express them, no
right.
matter whatever the consequences
Right.
are.
And that is the core of this conversation. Like how because lately you may have seen John has been writing about assistive AI tools. We did an episode about assistive AI tools on AppStories back in December. I have been writing about AI tools myself. And we're all sort of just taking a look at the landscape, and but we're getting some fair comments from people asking, how do you reconcile your strong opinion from last year with the
Right.
reality of what you're writing about today? And like here's what I will say, and I also obviously want to hear from you. I feel like it becomes this difficult conversation that as an indie website you need to have now in 2025, which is, let's face it, nothing else is basically happening in tech at the moment. And I mean, even if you just look at MacStories and the scope of content that MacStories has typically covered, Um, I struggled to write a review of iOS without Apple Intelligence. Um, Look at the latest articles that Neil Leon has published about the iOS features that are not about Apple Intelligence. Every company's focus right now is on AI, computational photography, generative tools, which I still don't like, but basically the entire conversation is about that. So, from my perspective, I could say, well, drawing the line here, MacStories is never gonna write about any form of AI ever.
Right.
And the reality of that is that if I and you, if we made that decision, um, I don't want to say that we would stop publishing MacStories, but the volume of articles would be extremely low. And as a result, we got to think about the business. We have people employed. We have writers. We have an editor. It's not just me sitting at a desk in 2010 and just blogging away about indie apps. And the reality is that we are writing about Apple and we are writing about tech, and the entire tech industry is moving in this direction. If we don't find a way to reconcile what we think about AI training and what we think about AI in general with the reality that we have a website that needs to have content and needs to have something that people can read, let me just ask the audience, is the solution that we're going to stop publishing MacStories? Is that, to uphold this position, we don't do anything anymore?
Right.
And
No, I think you're right. And look, I totally understand that there are probably some people out there who say, well, you have this principled position on training models, and every model has to be trained before it's released, and therefore you should be against every tool that is
right.
built on a model that has been used, that has scraped your website. And I get that position, but I don't think that, as you've kind of pointed out, I think alluded to, is that it's not a practical solution. We are a tech website. We cover tech. There's nothing bigger in tech right now than AI. And you know what? The fact of the matter is, even though those models were made in a way that I don't like, there are good tools out there being built. There are tools now that are far better than when you and I wrote that letter in the summertime. There are true assistive tools that I think don't cross the line of the kind of things that we don't like, because it's the combination of the training and also the generative stuff that we wrote about last summer. And I think we were pretty careful in that letter not to say that all AI is bad. We pointed out generative AI. And I know that there's a continuum here, and people can argue about what's generative, like truly generative, that's taking away, that's either creating fake art or taking away somebody's job or something like that we'd be opposed to, versus something that's assistive and helping you. And one of the things that I keep coming back to is one of the best tools that I've found so far, which is something called granola.ai, which when you and I have a meeting or something, I can have it listening in the background and it'll create a summary at the end of everything we talked about and a list of all the tasks. And that's the kind of thing that I'm okay with, and the kind of thing that I think is a good example of assistive AI that is fine with me. Because let's face it, I'm not going to have somebody sit in our meeting and take notes for us, and it saves me time, or you time. Like there was a time when I had a meeting the other day where you couldn't make it, so I did the notes through Granola and I sent them to you. That saved me maybe 20 minutes of doing that myself, and I'm not going to hire somebody to do that. That's one of those things that's like, I don't know, someone using Photoshop or using Grammarly or something like that to do their own work. There's a continuum here between truly assistive and generative things that are bad. And while I know that there are gray areas, so far for me, I think it's been very easy for me to choose which things I think are okay and which aren't. I'm not using AI. For instance, your iOS review, we hired an artist to do the artwork for that, and we did that very deliberately to kind of make a point.
Right.
And you'd never use generative AI to create images for the website. Neither would I. None of the writers at MacStories would. So there are lines, But I do think that there are tools here that are truly useful. And for two people who run a small company, if anything, we are stretched thin all the time. And anything that can make us more efficient and get us back to doing the writing and making the podcasts and all that faster and giving us more time for that is in the end of the day a good thing.
Right, right. And I wanna talk about the other side of the coin also, which
Mm,
is we've been getting over I have personally been getting over the past few months since we started addressing sort of like how AI makes us feel uncomfortable. But I've received a lot of comments from people, and it's been a spectrum,
sure.
some of them really upset, some of them just providing actual useful criticism. The other side of the coin being, if the rest of the world finds utility in tools like ChatGPT or Gemini or Claude, why do you act so pretentious about the fact that you don't want to cover these tools, even though I got a handful of comments a few weeks ago via email from people saying, um, I don't have, basically along the lines of like, I don't have the money to hire an editor or to hire, I don't have the budget to hire or to sign up for other tools that are more expensive. A $20 a month ChatGPT subscription lets me do my job more quickly and allows me to be more productive, at the office, for example. And so
Hmm.
why do you act somebody said elitist or something like that,
Hmm.
and which is a sort of opposition that I understand and that
Yeah.
resonates with me. The idea that if the rest of the world, if a good portion of your readers don't care about the ethics of training, and they're now using computers and their phones in a certain way, do you completely disregard that part of the audience? Which is a it's an interesting problem, because how do you, basically it boils down to, how do you reconcile your morals and obviously the the energy impact of AI and data centers? How do you
Hmm.
reconcile all of that with the reality that of your X thousand of readers, 60% of them uses these tools and doesn't find any sort of useful related content on MacStories? What's the calculus there as a website owner? How do you reconcile the fact that I feel so strongly about AI training with these readers who thought, oh, maybe Federico and John are going to cover some useful AI apps for me, because I found them really worthy. But now John and Federico have taken this position. Now MacStories is useless. Therefore, and I'm not going to say that like this is tricky, because like obviously it is about money and it is about like running MacStories as a business. But for
Right.
me, and this is something that I've said over the course of the entire history of MacStories, for me the biggest problem has always been irrelevance, fading into irrelevance. MacStories is turning 16 this year, and it's not like, I've had over the course of 16 years the good months and the bad months with MacStories finances, and we're fortunate enough to be in a position when we can have a small team, we can have a couple of developers, we can afford these things, and we can afford these things despite the awful situation of the ad market, because of people supporting us. But people support us, some of them, thank you out of the goodness of their hearts, because they like what we do. But let's
Hmm.
face it, a good part of the audience supports us because they find MacStories useful.
Yeah, they
And
want something in return, and
they
they
want something in return. It's a trans
and we try to give that to them, obviously.
and we
But
try. But if we become irrelevant, I think it would be a shame for MacStories to say we faded into irrelevance willingly, because we completely ignored how the tech industry was changing. But in doing so, at least we did it with strong morals. But now the website is closed, the club membership doesn't exist anymore. we had to lay off a bunch of people, and it's just me and John blogging away for free about the occasional indie app that doesn't have AI and strikes us as a good app to cover on MacStories. Is that a positive outcome?
No,
I don't think
and I'll
so.
tell you, I think the better outcome is that we incorporate our skepticism about AI and the way it's
Exactly.
trained
Yes.
into our coverage, and that we look at these companies hard and we question what they're doing, how they're going about doing it, whether it's, as you said, the climate impact, whether it's the way things are trained. And we don't just, take this stuff at face value. There's an awful lot. Now, the hype isn't just right now with the AI companies. The hype is coming from, from the media itself, because this is obviously a hot area, and there are a lot of people who have jumped on the bandwagon and aren't really looking at this stuff with a critical eye. And I think you and I are in a good position to do that, because we don't take this stuff at face value. We do kind of scrutinize it the way we've scrutinized apps all these years, and also, with the context of our position on how training, what we don't like about training and what we don't like about certain generative tools.
Yeah, and I think here comes the better part of this conversation. Hopefully, I feel like you we can pretty easily draw a line and say, are we gonna cover generative illustration photo tools? No, we find them creepy. We find them wrong. I don't like the idea of replacing actual designers or photographers or
Right.
video makers. I don't like that. Are we gonna cover? Are we gonna cover tools that aim to replace writers? Are we gonna hire an AI engineer? An AI? No, we're not gonna
Right.
do that. But is there a space for us to cover things that make you more productive? Things that AIs that are basically a new form of automation. I think there is that space for
Yeah,
us.
it's really what's always been at the core of MacStories since the very beginning. It's just in a different format now, I think.
Uh,
And I think thinking about it as automation is a good approach to it,
yes,
Federico. I think
yeah.
that's a very good way to think about it.
I feel like I've always liked writing about how computers can work for us, not how computers can work instead of us,
Replace us. Right,
replace us,
exactly.
but like
Right.
as instruments, as tools, as
Tools.
the bicycle for the mind, so to speak. Like the idea of we're still humans, and I so fundamentally believe in the role of creativity and human art and just being weird and coming up with weird original ideas. But I also believe in the idea of humans having intellect and free will and being able to use a computer to work for them. And so whenever I look at tools like deep research, for example, which is a tool that now both ChatGPT and Google Gemini have. And that's
Right.
basically, in very simplistic terms, like a very fancy web browser combined with a large language model that can go out on the internet and discover a lot of sources and bring you a research about a topic. Like that's something that I would have done manually. It would have taken me 2 hours, and the results probably wouldn't have been still that good. Now I can incorporate that sort of workflow, and I'm going to get a bunch of results, and I'm still going to check the sources because this is another fundamental point. Inherently, I don't trust what the LLM says.
Right.
So as a
Same.
result, and this is quite the paradox of this, because as a result of these deep research tools or web search built into ChatGPT or Gemini, as a result, I'm clicking the sources more. So I'm actually visiting more websites. And I'm going to give you a very practical example. On Unwind last week, I brought a new band to the show called Slowly Slowly, and their album that came out a couple of weeks ago. Now, first layer of this onion, I discovered Slowly Slowly because of the algorithm on Spotify. So I don't know if that's based on AI, whatever it is, but an algorithm led me to discover this actual band by humans from Australia. I had no idea they existed. Fell in love with this band. I wanted to bring the album to unwind. I used deep research in Google Gemini, and I asked, can you give me like a summary of this band, Slowly Slowly, and their new album, so that I can talk about it on my podcast? It created this like short essay for me with a whole bunch of sources. I discovered a couple of really cool Australian music websites
Oh
because
yeah.
of that research. Now, could I have done that myself if I wanted to? Probably. But the net result is that I'm now subscribed to those websites. I brought this small indie band to the show, pretty well researched. I think I mentioned a couple of anecdotes about the album
Hmm.
that deep research surfaced for me. And so this is the balance that I'm talking about. Like, how can you take advantage of these tools and combine them with the humanities? Combine them,
Right.
not replace art, but use it as a powerful instrument to help what we're doing. And I understand if politically speaking, that's still not good enough for a part of the audience that would come back to us and say, you hypocrites, you were against AI last year and now you're talking about it. But and I'm sorry if that's the takeaway. But I personally, maybe this is my shortcoming as a human and as an editor in chief. I don't see an alternative, and I think we're doing a pretty fair and balanced job at it, but we're navigating these waters just like anybody else. And I think
Exactly.
at least we have a North Star. And at least we're trying to do good. And if that's not good enough for some people, hey, you can't please everyone in life, you
No,
know?
you can't. We're doing the best we can. And I think it's worth, if people have questions about this, it is worth going back and reading that original letter that we wrote, because I think we did what we're saying today is consistent with that position. I mean, we don't think it's changed. I will say that after we wrote that letter, I walked away from all AI tools for about 4 months or so. I just didn't have it in me anymore, because that was like intellectually and emotionally draining time for us in a lot of ways. And we really had to see where things went and get away from it for a little while before we revisited AI, which is why you're seeing it pop up more on MacStories now, because Federico and I both started digging back in over the holidays and since then, and reacquainting ourselves with all the tools and seeing what's out there now and what we can do that supports our work, doesn't change or take away from our work. So I think
Yeah.
that's kind of where we're coming from. It's one of those things. I mean, I think if anything, we probably torture ourselves over this more than people realize. I mean, I think about it all the time. I don't know about you.
Yeah, no, no. I mean, it's constantly on my mind. The amount of reading and research that I've been doing these past few weeks, especially at night.
And thinking about right,
You've
and thinking
probably
about what's right, about what
yeah,
parts of it are okay and what's wrong, and
you've probably seen me like blogging away at night about this
oh
stuff.
yeah,
Yeah. But there's something else that I wanted to say before we move on to the post show. And I think in the post show, maybe John, we should talk about some of the specific tools that we've been
yeah, we
using
should do
lately.
that. I think
Um,
talking about the tools would be a good
yeah,
idea.
yeah. But something else that I wanted to say is that I have a a newfound understanding for people who work at these companies, Google, Apple, Meta, and that maybe are being, I don't want to say forced, because that's a word I don't like, but they have been told at their job that, look, now you got to do AI. And maybe they don't like it. Maybe the people who were tasked with doing the training of Apple Intelligence were against that approach.
Hmm.
And I have a newfound understanding for that position. And I think last year I was very upset about it and I was very angry about it. But I think now that I find myself in this position where the coverage of anything tech related that is not AI has dried up so much, and to be in that position where you have your opinions and you have your thoughts, but you still gotta make it to the end of the month to get your paycheck, and to be employed, and to go back home and say I'm still a software engineer, even though I'm working on stuff that I absolutely hate, it's not a good position to be in, but such is life. Sometimes, and I hate to say this, because ideally I would live in this idealistic world where we get to do, and we only get to do the things we love and the things we are ethically comfortable with. But sometimes you just gotta suck it up and do it. And that's like, maybe maybe it's, I don't know. I think it's just the reality of the situation is that every single tech company is doing this. There are tech projects that are not about AI that we are writing about. The open web, ActivityPub, RSS, all of these projects we are writing about, we are covering. And that is maybe the only interesting thing happening in tech right now that is not about AI, open protocols, plain text, RSS feeds, that sort of stuff. We're writing about it.
In software, at least, I think that we're also in a new world of gadgets, which I think is another area that we'll be doing more of.
We're doing MPC, we're talking about handhelds, we've been trying to diversify. But the reality is, if you look at MacStories in the silo of MacStories and Apple stuff,
yep.
I mean, you know it, I know it. Look at iOS, look at what's going on. What else is happening?
Right. No, I agree with you. I mean, I think it's worth saying that MacStories isn't becoming an AI website by any stretch. We're not changing what we're covering, but I think what Federico's explaining is that AI is going to permeate every aspect of everyone's lives, whether it's, whether you're talking about Apple, whether you're talking about video games, whether you're talking about really just about anything. And we're not going to act as though that part of the world doesn't exist.
Yeah. So, we're still gonna do we're gonna do our MacStories Selects Awards. I'm gonna do my shortcuts. Maybe those shortcuts will eventually be incorporated with Apple Intelligence, so I'm gonna have to write about shortcuts and AI. We're gonna do our usual things. We're gonna talk about indie apps. We're gonna talk about RSS. We're gonna do our hidden gems on AppStories. Like, we're gonna do that, but it basically is becoming impossible to stay away from AI, because even in your favorite indie app, if it's not there already, I bet with iOS 19, you're going to see Apple Intelligence integration.
Even if it's something simple like automatic tagging in a bookmarking app or something, those things are going to be built on AI.
If you are an indie developer, wouldn't you do it? Would you risk your app being irrelevant, never featured on the App Store, never updated for new features that people expect, just so that you can say, I don't want to touch AI with a 10-foot long stick? Like, you can do it, but that's your decision. And I think it's better. Our friend Mike Hurley said something interesting today in our private group thread that I just kind of want to steal and reference. Like, some people think that it's a crime to change your mind, and he was joking, like, you and John should go to prison for
right.
for covering AI on MacStories. But I think that's what I will end up in this conversation. I think we're living in this era, and it's changing so rapidly that it's a balancing act of staying true to some core values while also accepting the reality that the people around you, whether it's developers or other websites or the companies that you're covering or the developers making the apps, they're all moving in a certain direction. And either you accept it and try to combine your values with the reality of, like, let me see if there's something useful that I can cover here, or I am concerned you become irrelevant, and I
very quickly too, given the speed of things these days.
And I don't want to become irrelevant. So we're gonna try our best. Let's see what happens. would be my conclusion.
We'll just keep trying. Well, we always do. All right. Well, Federico, I'll leave it at that. That's a great place to stop. We, in the post show, the brand new AppStories Plus post show, will be talking about some of the tools we've been testing and
Yeah.
using recently that incorporate AI. So join us there. Go to plus.club if you want to become a Club Premier member and get get AppStories Plus that way, or just subscribe to AppStories Plus itself by going to appstories.plus. You'll learn about all the benefits there because it's extended, ad-free, and delivered early. You can find the two of us over at MacStories.net, and we're on, of course, social media, where Federico is at Fetici. That's VITICCI, and I'm at John Voorhees. JOHNVOORHWS. Talk to you later, Federico.
Ciao, John.